You ever get fined for something you legally own, on land you legally bought, by someone who doesn't even understand the law they pretend to enforce? That's how my week started, with a bright orange envelope duct taped to my front gate, courtesy of the Oak Hollow Homeowners Association. Violation notice, it read. Improper vehicle storage, tractor parked outside designated garage area. Apparently my John Deere 5075E, which I parked on my own gravel patch beside my barn, was too agricultural for their tastes. I'm Archer Jennings, 46, Army vet and part-time contractor. I've lived on the edge of Oak Hollow for 5 years, just past the cookie-cutter side of the neighborhood where folks compete over who has the greenest lawn. My property's on the outermost lot, 5 acres, zoned rural residential. That means I can park my tractor wherever I damn well please. The woman who taped that fine to my gate, Loretta McMillan, president of the HOA, queen of the clipboard, and walking embodiment of a migraine. Late 50s, platinum blonde bob, and a voice like a dial-up modem. I'd seen her once yell at a kid for sidewalk chalk because it violated community aesthetics. So naturally, I marched up to the next HOA board meeting, fine in hand. "This is invalid," I said, slapping the paper on the folding table. "My land's zoned differently than yours. I'm outside the covenant lines and the tractor isn't breaking any county code." Loretta blinked twice, her lips tightening. "Mr. Jennings, your property may be adjacent, but you are still part of Oak Hollow. We voted last year to extend the covenant boundary. It passed with a majority. You can't retroactively apply that to land not included in the original charter," I said. "I never agreed to that. I didn't even get a notice." "Well," she sniffed, "maybe you should attend more meetings. In the meantime, the fine stands. Pay it within 30 days or we'll place a lien on your property." That's when I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a power grab. She wanted control, and if I let this slide, it wouldn't stop with my tractor. So while Loretta strutted back to her SUV like she'd just won a court case, I got to work. I pulled up the original Oak Hollow HOA charter, zoning maps, and property lines from the county registrar. Turns out, my lot was grandfathered in from before the HOA even existed. I wasn't just outside their jurisdiction, I was untouchable. But I wasn't going to just prove her wrong. I was going to make damn sure she never had a reason to walk onto my land again. See, there was a narrow, shared gravel road the HOA maintained that connected my lot to the main neighborhood. It was the only way in or out. Loretta thought that gave her leverage, so I bought the wooded strip behind my property, about half an acre, from an old farmer who'd been trying to sell it for years. Then I rented an excavator, hired 2 buddies, and over the next week we carved out a brand new road that linked directly to the county highway. No HOA roads, no HOA signs, and definitely no HOA access. By the time Loretta showed up again, this time with an actual clipboard and a smug little tight-lipped smile, I was ready. "You're in violation of Section 12. Driveway modifications require community oversight," she said, waving her papers like they meant something. "Not if I'm not part of your community," I said, tossing a manila folder onto the hood of her Lexus. "County zoning, original HOA charter, and the deed to the new road. I'm out, Loretta. You've got no say here." She flipped through the pages, her eyes narrowing as her face turned a shade redder than her lipstick. "You can't just isolate yourself." "I can, and I did. And you just lost your only access to my land." She looked past me, saw the fresh gravel winding through the trees, and knew I wasn't bluffing. "You'll regret this," she hissed. I shrugged. "Not as much as you're about to, because the next step." Proving Loretta and her board committed actual fraud when they tried to annex my land without consent. And I had just the trail of emails and signatures to do it. 3 days after Loretta's empty warning, I found a plain white envelope wedged under my shop door. No stamp, no return address. Just my name in shaky block letters. Inside, a single sheet of yellow legal paper with one sentence written in black ink. "You made a mistake." It wasn't signed. I locked my shop, walked back across the gravel, and scanned the tree line bordering the new road. Nothing. No tracks, no tire marks, not even a broken twig. But someone had been close enough to reach my door. That told me one thing: Loretta wasn't letting go. I wasn't rattled. I've dealt with worse than cowardly threats, but I wasn't going to sit back and wait for whatever stunt she had planned next. That night, I installed 2 motion-activated trail cameras, one at the edge of the new road, hidden in a cedar stump, the other angled toward the side of the barn where the tractor sat under its tarp. Next morning, I drove over to the county clerk's office. I'd found something strange while reading through the HOA's meeting minutes, a vote held last March, where they claimed to have unanimous approval to expand their jurisdiction. But there was no record of mailed notices, no signatures from affected homeowners, and no updated zoning approval from the county. "Can I see the permit application for the Oak Hollow boundary expansion?" I asked the clerk behind the counter, a tall guy with gray hair and glasses that slid down his nose every few seconds. He typed something into the computer, then frowned. "There's no such application on file. Nothing from the HOA at all," he clicked again. "Last filing we have is from 5 years ago, nothing recent. You sure it was approved?" They said it was, claimed they had a majority vote. He leaned back. "Then they're either lying or they skipped the process. And if they're enforcing rules on land outside their legal bounds, that's a serious problem." I thanked him and asked for a certified copy of the zoning map, plus the last recorded HOA boundary filing. Cost me $28, but worth every penny. Back home, I printed a comparison overlay showing my property outside the last recorded HOA borders. I added it to the folder I'd already started photos of the new road, time-stamped emails from the HOA, and now the county's own records. I didn't have to wait long before the next escalation. That Saturday, 2 uniformed sheriff's deputies pulled up while I was stacking lumber behind the barn. One was young, probably fresh out of the academy. The older one had a clipboard in hand and a badge that read Deputy Harlan. "Morning," he said, adjusting his belt. "We got a call from Oak Hollow HOA. Said you've been operating heavy machinery on unauthorized land and creating a traffic hazard." I wiped my hands and nodded toward the gravel road. "I built that road on land I own, zoned rural residential. I've got the deed and survey markers if you want to see 'em." Harlan glanced at his partner, then back at me. "You got the paperwork on you?" I walked them to the shop and handed him the folder. He flipped through it slowly, stopping at the zoning overlay. "You're outside their jurisdiction." "Exactly," he handed the folder back. "I don't see a crime here, no laws broken. They might have wasted county resources making this call, though." The younger deputy stepped forward. "Just curious, why are they this upset over a tractor and a gravel road?" "Because they want control," I said. "And they're not used to people telling them no." Harlan nodded once. "If they keep calling with false claims, let us know. That can turn into harassment." I walked them out and locked the gate behind them. The second they were gone, I checked the trail cams. Sure enough, the one near the barn had picked up movement around 3 in the morning. A figure in a hoodie had walked up to the tractor, pulled back the tarp, then left. Nothing stolen, just inspected. That night, I installed floodlights on motion sensors. Then I sent an email to my cousin Erin, who worked as a paralegal for a firm in the next county over. I asked her to help me draft a cease and desist letter citing harassment, boundary violations, and abuse of authority. She called me the next morning. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "I looked up the HOA's filings. The president, Loretta, right? She signed off on a fabricated annexation map. It's not just invalid, it's forged. Define forged. She copied the original boundary map, edited it to include your property, then submitted it as internal documentation. No county stamp, no public record. Just a fake map used to justify fines and threats." I took a deep breath. "That's criminal." "Yep. And if they issued fines based on that map, that's fraud. Wire fraud if they sent it through email or mail. And if she signed it knowingly, that's a felony. I asked her to forward everything she found. She did full copies of the altered maps, timestamps from the HOA's email system, and an internal memo where Loretta instructed the board to move quickly before anyone notices the change. This wasn't some petty feud anymore. This was evidence of a crime. I drove to the sheriff's office that afternoon and handed everything over to a detective named Carla Ruiz. She took one look at the side-by-side maps and raised an eyebrow. "Where'd you get these? Public filings and internal emails." "I've got a witness willing to sign an affidavit too." She tapped her pen on the desk. "If this checks out, we're talking about criminal misrepresentation, possibly multiple counts. I'll open an investigation." 2 days later, the sheriff's office executed a search warrant at the HOA office. They walked out with 3 desktop towers, a box of files, and Loretta in handcuffs. That evening, every mailbox in Oak Hollow got a letter from the county attorney's office. It explained the investigation, confirmed the HOA had no authority to annex new land without a multi-step legal process, and advised residents to report any improper fines or threats they'd received. My phone didn't stop ringing for 2 hours. Turns out, I wasn't the only one they'd gone after. A retired couple 3 lots down had been fined for having a non-compliant garden structure. A single mother had been threatened with eviction over a playhouse in her backyard. And one guy, Tom, a mechanic, had been ordered to remove his work trailer even though he had a permit from the county. They all thought they were alone. Now they knew they weren't. We met at my place that weekend, 9 of us sitting around a folding table under the barn awning. I laid out everything: maps, email printouts, and a list of every homeowner who'd been targeted. "This isn't just about fines," I said. "They wanted us quiet, obedient. They used fear and fake paperwork to get their way, but that's over." Tom leaned forward. "What do we do now?" "We take their power away," I said. "We contact every homeowner in the neighborhood, we tell them what really happened. And we vote them out, every last one." The group erupted in quiet determination. Plans were made, flyers printed, door-to-door visits organized. Loretta had built her influence with intimidation and lies. We were about to bury it with truth. By the following week, the neighborhood had changed. It started small, people waving when they passed by, nodding as I worked on my new gate. Then came the questions. A man in his 70s leaned on my fence and asked if it was true the HOA had forged documents. A teenage girl came by with her dad to ask if she could help pass out flyers in her section of Oak Hollow. Every day, a few more neighbors showed up with their own stories, their own frustrations, their own reasons why they were done being silenced. We created a spreadsheet to track it all. Not just the victims over 40 by that point, but also the bylaws they'd twisted, the fines they'd fabricated, and the dates of every incident. One line stood out: a $5,000 fee charged to a single mother named Jasmine for landscape violations. She lived in a modest house near the park and had planted drought-resistant native plants after her son developed asthma. Loretta had ordered her to remove them and replace them with sod. When she couldn't afford it, they tacked on late fees until the total ballooned. I asked Jasmine to come by. She brought a cardboard box with every notice they'd sent her, and at the bottom, a copy of a bank statement showing a payment made to Oak Hollow Beautification Fund. There was no such fund listed in the HOA's official budget. That same night, I called Detective Ruiz again. "I think we've got something bigger," I said. "This isn't just harassment. It looks like they created a fake fund to siphon money." She met me the next morning at her office. We laid Jasmine's documents on her desk, along with a few others that showed similar payments, different names, same bank account number. Ruiz frowned and opened a file drawer. "You're not the only one who's come forward," she said. "We've had 3 separate reports in the last 48 hours. all with payments going to an unregistered account. She picked up her phone, dialed an extension, and within minutes a man in a dark suit entered. He introduced himself as Agent Kwan with the state's Department of Financial Regulation. We spent the next hour walking through everything. The forged maps were already under review, but this was embezzlement. Kwan confirmed the bank account was not tied to any registered HOA account. In fact, it was under the name of a shell nonprofit, Oak Hollow Community Development Initiative, registered 6 months ago by none other than Loretta McMillan. He closed the folder and stood. "This isn't just a civil issue anymore," he said. "This is criminal misappropriation of funds. If the numbers hold, we're looking at felony-level fraud." 2 days later, it hit the news. Local Channel 7 ran a segment titled "HOA President Under Investigation for Fraud," and the image they used: Loretta being escorted out of her office in handcuffs, again this time with a box of documents in tow. The fallout was immediate. Residents flooded the HOA email account demanding answers. Several board members resigned quietly, their names scrubbed from the HOA's website within hours. A few tried to distance themselves, but with emails and meeting notes implicating them in votes and approvals tied to the fake fund, detachment wasn't an option. Tom, the mechanic, printed out a list of all active board members and pinned it to the community bulletin board with a red marker scrawled across the top: "Accountable." Meanwhile, I was contacted by a woman named Dana who used to serve as treasurer 3 years earlier. She'd resigned after discovering discrepancies in landscaping invoices, but was threatened with legal action for breach of board confidentiality. She never spoke out until now. We met at the old feed store downtown. She arrived with a flash drive and a folder full of handwritten notes. "I didn't know who to trust back then," she said, "but I kept copies." The files showed something staggering: over $70,000 in payments to a contractor called Verdant Growth Services. No state licensing, no business address, just a P.O. box in another county. Dana had traced the checks and found that the company was registered to a man named Alan McMillan, Loretta's brother-in-law. I delivered the data to Detective Ruiz and Agent Kwan the same afternoon. They didn't say much, but the way they exchanged glances said plenty. The next morning, 2 unmarked vehicles rolled into Oak Hollow. They didn't go to the HOA office this time. They went door to door, questioning former board members, collecting statements. Word spread fast. People who'd once nodded politely to Loretta in HOA meetings now avoided her name like it was a curse. Then came the emergency meeting. Legally, the HOA had to hold a special session after losing quorum on the board. The remaining 3 members, none of whom had been implicated, yet scheduled it for the following Friday at the community clubhouse. They hoped to calm things down, maybe even regain control. They didn't expect over 100 residents to show up. The room was packed shoulder to shoulder. I stood near the back with Jasmine and Dana while Tom helped set up folding chairs. The 3 remaining board members looked pale, outnumbered, and completely unprepared. A man in the front row raised his hand. "Before we begin, I'd like to make a motion." The chairwoman hesitated. We haven't established quorum yet. Motion to dissolve the current board and initiate a full audit of all HOA finances." Applause erupted. The chairwoman tried to gavel it down, but another hand shot up. "I second the motion," said a woman holding a binder of printed emails. Someone yelled, "Third," and half the room stood in agreement. The board had no choice. They called for a vote. Ballots were passed out, and within 20 minutes the count was called: 98 in favor, 2 against, 3 abstaining. The board was dissolved. A temporary committee was elected on the spot. I was nominated, but I declined and recommended Jasmine instead. She accepted, and the cheers that followed were louder than anything I'd heard in that room before. That night, the committee posted an open invitation for residents to review the HOA's books. Dana volunteered to help organize the audit. Within 48 hours, they found over 25 fraudulent entries, all tied to shell companies or personal accounts. The county prosecutor filed formal charges against Loretta, Alan McMillan, and 2 former board members: embezzlement, wire fraud, falsification of public records, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Bail was denied. The judge overseeing the case ordered restitution hearings. Victims would be reimbursed using seized assets, including Loretta's lake house, 2 counties over. By the end of the month, Oak Hollow had changed again. The new committee passed a motion to prevent any future annexations without full resident vote and independent legal review. They hired a third-party firm to oversee finances going forward, and they created a community forum not governed by bylaws or fines but by mutual respect. I kept to myself for the most part. Rebuilt my fence. Added a keypad to the new road gate. But I didn't mind the knock on the door when Jasmine came by with a fresh baked pie and a simple thank you. Or when Tom dropped off a sign he made in his shop. It read, "Private Road, built by a man who wouldn't back down." I mounted it proudly. And the spot where Loretta once parked her Lexus to hand out bogus fines. It's overgrown now. Wildflowers. No tire marks. Just quiet. The first real rain of the season came a week after the temporary committee took over. It rolled in slow and heavy, soaking the gravel of my new road and turning the ground into thick clay. I stood under the wide awning of the barn, watching the water trace lines through the dirt, when Jasmine pulled up in her sedan. The windshield wipers squeaked once before she killed the engine. She stepped out with a folder pressed to her chest, hair damp from the dash through the rain. "You might want to see this," she said, handing it over. The folder was thin, but inside were copies of checks made out to a name I didn't recognize: Hearthstone Solutions. Each one was signed by a former board member who hadn't yet been charged. The payments weren't for landscaping or maintenance. They were labeled Community Compliance Consulting. "How'd you find these?" I asked. "We're going through everything line by line. This batch was buried in the general ledger under administrative expenses. Who's behind Hearthstone? We don't know yet. But the routing number links to an account in Florida, not even in this state." I stared at the pages. The amounts weren't massive: 2,000 here, 1,500 there, but there were dozens. Quiet withdrawals spread across months, all authorized without resident knowledge. "You think they were laundering money?" I asked. "Not exactly. More like slowly bleeding the budget with junk consulting contracts. We tried calling the number listed on one of the invoices. Disconnected." I set the folder on the workbench and leaned on the edge. "We need to trace it. If this was more than just Loretta and her brother-in-law, we need to find out who else was in on it." Jasmine nodded. "I already called Agent Kwan. He's sending someone from financial crimes to help." That someone turned out to be a forensic accountant named Riyama Patel. She showed up 2 days later wearing a navy rain jacket and carrying a laptop that looked about ready to melt from overuse. She didn't waste time with small talk. By the end of the first hour, she'd isolated 15 separate payments that had been disguised as vendor reimbursements. "Hearthstone doesn't exist as a licensed business anywhere in the country," she said, typing rapidly. "But the email address used to send invoices was created on a server in North Carolina. That's outside our jurisdiction, but I've already flagged it with the Bureau's regional office." "You think this was a coordinated scam?" I asked. "I think someone knew how to siphon money without raising red flags, and I think they didn't work alone." That evening, I got a call from Dana. She sounded shaken. "I checked the archived emails we recovered from the office," she said. "There's something off. Some of the messages between board members, they're too vague. Like they were trying not to say things directly. Give me an example." One of them says, "Make sure Hearthstone gets the next round before the switch," and another says, "No paper, just the usual." I hung up and drove to Jasmine's place. The lights in the living room were on, and several people from the committee were gathered around her dining table. Maps, binders, and laptops covered every inch of the surface. We laid out the new findings. Riyamad joined via video call, her voice sharp and unhurried. "There are patterns," she said. "The payments coincide with key votes, ones that passed with razor-thin margins. It's possible these funds were used to influence decisions." "You mean bribes?" Jasmine asked. "Indirect ones. Kickbacks, maybe." "Paid out as consulting fees to keep certain board members voting a certain way." Tom, who joined us after work, crossed his arms. "So they were paying each other off with our dues." "Looks that way," Riyamad said. "And if we can link this to the HOA's bank account, we can prove they used community funds to do it." The county prosecutor moved faster this time. Subpoenas were issued within 48 hours. Investigators seized financial records from the HOA's bank and pulled digital logs from the email server. What they uncovered sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. 6 former board members had approved payments to Hearthstone. 5 of them had received personal deposits within 24 hours of those payments clearing. The amounts matched. The grand jury didn't take long. Indictments were handed down the following week: conspiracy to commit fraud, misuse of public funds, and falsifying business records. At the center of it all was a former vice president of the board, a man named Gregory Heller. Quiet, forgettable, and up until that point, not even on anyone's radar. Turns out he had created Hearthstone on paper using a fake EIN and a rented mailbox 2 states away. He funneled nearly $30,000 through the shell company before things unraveled. When the sheriff's department picked him up, he tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding. The judge wasn't impressed, but the fallout didn't stop with the arrests. Residents demanded a full overhaul of the HOA's structure. The temporary committee worked with a municipal lawyer to rewrite the governing documents from scratch. No more closed-door votes, no more unchecked spending. Every major decision would now require not just a vote, but full disclosure and a 2/3 majority. Jasmine pushed for term limits. Dana advocated for an independent ombudsman to review disputes. Tom suggested an annual audit by a licensed CPA, paid for from a separate escrow fund. Every proposal passed. The new rules were ratified at a public vote held in the park. Over 200 people showed up, more than half the neighborhood. It was the largest turnout Oak Hollow had ever seen for anything not involving fireworks or food trucks. As for Loretta, she pled guilty to multiple charges in exchange for a reduced sentence and full restitution. Her lake house was sold at auction. The proceeds, along with those from Alan McMillan's seized assets, were used to reimburse residents who'd been fined, scammed, or coerced. Jasmine received her entire landscaping fine back, plus interest. Dana was offered a formal apology by the new board and asked to serve as financial liaison going forward. She accepted, and the rest of us. We got peace. A month later, I stood at the top of my private road, gate open, watching a pair of kids ride their bikes past without a care. The trail cameras were still up, but I hadn't checked them in weeks. The floodlights hadn't triggered once since the last arrest. I'd started building a greenhouse near the barn, mostly with salvaged windows and leftover lumber. Tom had helped with the framing. Jasmine had dropped off a few trays of seedlings. It wasn't much, but it felt like something worth growing. The old HOA office sat empty now, the metal sign stripped from the door. Someone had painted over the windows. Rumor was the county would repurpose the building into a community resource center. Classes, maybe. A place for residents to gather without agendas or pressure. The neighborhood didn't just survive. It changed, people talked more, helped more. A few even admitted they'd been afraid to push back before, afraid of fines or retaliation. Not anymore. As for me, I never saw Loretta again. Word was she moved to a gated community 3 counties over. One with strict rules and tightly manicured hedges. Fitting. But standing there, watching the sun dip behind the trees and the gravel road glowing gold beneath it, I didn't think about her. I thought about the people who stayed, who fought, who didn't fold when the pressure came. Justice wasn't just about punishment, it was about restoration. And Oak Hollow finally was whole again.